The small town of Stillwater, Minnesota, nestled beside the banks of the St. Croix River, had always been known for its historic charm and quiet, middle-class appeal. People here didn't lock their doors. They knew their neighbors and waved as they passed on the street. But that was before the Menendez brothers case hit national headlines, and before a strange series of events unfolded that left everyone questioning what they thought they knew about their peaceful town. The year was 2023, and Netflix's Monsters, the Lyle and Erik Menendez story, had become an overnight sensation, reigniting public interest in the infamous case of the two brothers who had brutally murdered their wealthy parents. The show didn't just retell the same old story. It delved deep into the psychological complexities, family secrets, and buried motivations that had left a trail of horror and disbelief in its wake. But the part of the story that no one had heard before, the part that had somehow been erased from public memory, was a set of eerie and unexplained occurrences in Stillwater that paralleled the Menendez case far too closely for comfort. It all started when a Netflix producer named Alice Donovan began researching locations for the new season of Monsters. Her goal was to find small towns that could serve as a backdrop for parts of the story that focused on the brothers' childhood. After days of searching through the Midwest, Alice stumbled upon Stillwater. The town's mix of idyllic beauty and underlying eeriness seemed perfect. She booked a visit, hoping to capture the town's energy for the next stage of the series. Alice wasn't the kind of person to believe in coincidences, but what she found in Stillwater felt like more than that. Almost immediately after arriving, locals began whispering about an old house on the outskirts of town, the Mitchell estate. The Mitchell family had been a prominent name in Stillwater for generations, wealthy and well-connected, much like the Menendez family in Beverly Hills. But in the early 1990s, the family's legacy came crashing down. Jonathan and Evelyn Mitchell, respected pillars of the community, were found dead in their sprawling estate, and rumors began to swirl around their two sons, Matthew and Ryan. Much like Lyle and Erik Menendez, the Mitchell brothers were handsome, well-educated, and seemingly devoted to their parents. But after the murders, the two boys disappeared without a trace, and the case was never solved. For decades, the Mitchell estate sat abandoned at the edge of Stillwater, slowly rotting away. Townspeople avoided it like the plague, convinced the place was cursed. But what made Alice's skin crawl wasn't the fact that the murders had never been solved. It was the eerie parallels between the Mitchell case and the Menendez case, down to the smallest detail. Even the timing was suspicious, happening just a few years after the Menendez murders became a national sensation. Alice's gut told her there was something more to the story, something that had been deliberately hidden. Intrigued, Alice decided to dig deeper. She tracked down an old Stillwater newspaper editor, a man named Frank Reynolds, who had covered the Mitchell case extensively in the early 90s. Frank was in his 70s now, grizzled and retired, but he still had the sharp wit of a seasoned journalist. He invited Alice into his cluttered, musty house, where stacks of yellowing newspapers and files filled every corner. "Stillwater's been sitting on this story for decades," Frank told her, tapping a cigarette against the edge of an ashtray. "People here, they don't want to talk about it. They're scared. Always have been. The Mitchell boys vanished, but their ghosts still haunt this town." "What do you think really happened?" Alice asked, leaning forward, notebook in hand. Frank blew out a long stream of smoke and shook his head. "I was there the night they found the bodies. It wasn't just a murder scene. It was a massacre. Blood everywhere, and the looks on their faces, Jonathan and Evelyn Mitchell, like they had seen the devil himself. He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. But it's the boys that always bothered me. They were strange, real quiet. Never made friends in town, always kept to themselves. And then, right after the murders, they were gone. Just like that. No trace of them. It's like they vanished off the face of the earth. Alice felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just some forgotten true crime story. It was something more, something darker. Determined to uncover the truth, Alice contacted a real estate agent and arranged to tour the old Mitchell estate. She convinced her producer to come along, arguing that the house might hold clues that could tie into the new season of monsters. What she didn't tell him was that she felt an overwhelming sense of dread just thinking about the place. When they arrived, the estate looked like something out of a gothic horror novel. The large, crumbling mansion was covered in creeping vines, the windows shattered or boarded up, and the once pristine lawn had become overgrown and wild. Despite the decay, there was a strange beauty to it, as if the house was frozen in time, waiting for someone to uncover its secrets. As Alice and her producer walked through the rotting halls, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The walls seemed to whisper, the air heavy with an invisible weight. In one of the upstairs bedrooms, they found something that hadn't been mentioned in the police reports. An old journal tucked beneath a floorboard, its pages yellowed with age. It belonged to Matthew Mitchell, the oldest son. The entries were disturbing. They spoke of strange dreams, of seeing shadows at the foot of his bed at night. Matthew wrote about hearing voices, telling him to do terrible things, things that terrified him, but also felt inevitable. The last entry was dated the day before the murders, and it simply said, "They want us to be free. They want us to be like them." Alice felt a cold sweat break out across her skin. Who were they? And what did it mean to be free? Back in her hotel room, Alice began piecing together the story. The Menendez brothers had been driven by years of alleged abuse, leading them to kill their parents in a fit of rage. But the Mitchell brothers, it felt different. The journal entries, the strange whispers around the town. It felt like something had pushed them to do it, something supernatural, something no one wanted to acknowledge. That night, Alice couldn't sleep. She kept hearing footsteps in the hallway outside her door, but when she checked, no one was there. Her phone rang once, but when she answered, there was nothing but static on the other end. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones. The next morning, Alice decided to head to the local library, hoping to dig up more information on the Mitchell family. In the dusty archives, she found a clipping from 1975, a year before Matthew was born. It was an article about a tragic event on the Mitchell property. A group of teenagers had been playing near the estate when one of them disappeared. The others swore they heard the strange voices calling them into the woods, but no one believed them. The body was never found. As Alice read further, she found more articles, similar stories of people vanishing around the estate, some going back over 100 years. It was as if the land itself was cursed, drawing people in and then taking them away. Over the next few weeks, Alice became consumed by the story. She barely slept, her mind racing with theories and possibilities. She interviewed anyone she could find who had lived in Stillwater during the time of the Mitchell murders. But most people refused to talk. The ones who did only spoke in cryptic, fearful whispers, warning her to stay away from the estate. But Alice couldn't let it go. She knew there was something buried there, something the town was too afraid to confront. One evening, while Alice was reviewing her notes in her hotel room, there was a knock on the door. It was Frank Reynolds, the old newspaper editor. He looked pale, shaken. "You need to leave," he said, his voice trembling. "This story, whatever it is, it's not worth your life." Before Alice could ask him what he meant, he pressed something into her hand. It was an old cassette tape, labeled simply, "Mitchell House, Night of the Murders." "I recorded this that night," Frank said, his eyes darting around the room as if he expected something, or someone, to appear. "I've never played it back. I don't want to know what's on it. But if you want the truth, here it is." Alone in her room, Alice hesitated before sliding the tape into an old player she had borrowed from the library. The recording crackled to life, filled with background noise from the crime scene, police radios, footsteps, voices murmuring in the distance. And then she heard it. A voice. No, not just a voice. Voices. Multiple voices, whispering over each other, growing louder and louder until they drowned out everything else. The words were hard to make out, but Alice could hear fragments. "They want us. Free. Join us." Her blood ran cold as the whispers turned into a high-pitched scream that cut off abruptly. The tape ended. That night, Alice packed her things and left Stillwater, vowing never to return. She handed over her findings to the Netflix team, but they didn't use the Mitchell story. It was too dangerous, too disturbing. They couldn't explain it, and they didn't want to. But Alice knew the truth. The Menendez brothers had killed their parents out of rage, fear, and desperation. But the Mitchell brothers, whatever had driven them to murder their parents, it wasn't human. Something far older and darker had been lurking in Stillwater, waiting for its next victims. And it was still there, watching, waiting for someone else to come too close. As Monsters, the Lyle and Erik Menendez. Story took over Netflix. Millions of people across the world became captivated by the twisted tale of two brothers and their deadly secret. But for those who knew the truth about Stillwater, one thing was certain. Sometimes the monsters we see on screen are the least of our worries. A few months later, the Mitchell estate was torn down to make way for a new housing development. But even as the bulldozers moved in, workers reported strange occurrences. Tools going missing, whispering voices heard at night, and sightings of two boys standing at the edge of the property, watching in silence. The town of Stillwater remains quiet, but those who know its dark history avoid the land where the Mitchell estate once stood. Because some houses, some secrets, are better left buried. And sometimes the real monsters are the ones we can't see until it's too late.